syllables there. Sacred Circle Herbal Apothecary. And my name's Alexandra Keene. I currently teach at the College of Charleston and run an accredited program on regenerative design and all sorts of other programs, internships through the Office of Sustainability there. I also work at Coastal Pediatrics in town, and this was kind of like my little creative. I needed to get, have a little project to work on. So I started an apothecary that originally it was formed to create and farm all of these holistic and sustainable products that you could use for your body, so holistic and herbal medicine. And now it's become more of an educational tool, which is always exciting, and just my passion. And I'm going into the nursing career, so that's been really fun to merge those worlds together. So today, I thought, John and I were talking, we were thinking, okay, what would be a great topic for January? And everyone knows that the holidays can induce a lot of unnecessary chaos. So one thing that I thought about in running the programs over at CFC, I'm doing a lot of mycoremediation work, so using mushrooms to clean up heavy metals and toxins in the soil, brown sites, things like that. And one of our themes for the students is really looking at how can botanical medicine or our local ecology, how can we create this really nice start for the year and the semester? So I kind of wanted to mirror that in this form and talk about mental health and how to get started on the right foot for the year, and just addressing today, just a disclaimer, I'm not really going to go into the specifics of stress and anxiety and nervous disorders. Really today my intention is just to provide a nice set of botanical medicines that address those things. And if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or just shout out and we'll have some dialogue. Okay, so we're going to be covering a lot of different medicinals and reviewing them, some of which you may have heard of, others you may have not. Just a quick show of hands. Who is, who has heard of the term botanical medicine? Oh, yay! Normally it's like crickets. And herbalism, these are kind of some synonyms for using plants in our local ecology as a way to kind of buffer up our preventative healthcare measures. So this is just a quick disclaimer that anything that we discuss today, all the information is not intended or implied to be a substitute for what your physician or primary care would recommend, any type of professional medical advice. Please consult with your doctor first before using these medicines. And if you are on medications, there could be some contraindications. So just make sure you talk it over with them, do your research, and really we'll get into self-care assessment and creating a healthcare protocol. And we'll address a little bit more on that. But today we're going to cover just review short and long-term implications of stress, the cycle of that, stress, anxiety, nervous disorders, adrenal fatigue. What do we define that as? And then we're going to get into the juicy stuff. So talking about adaptogens, nootropics, nervines, digestive tonics, gut health. We're just going to do a nice cursory overview of some really amazing botanical medicine. And then I always just like to cap it off on mindfulness techniques for mental and physical health, right? So a lot of the times when I talk about and kind of try to frame botanical medicine, we look at it as a way of herbs or medications, like buying us time and space to be able to make any adjustments that we need in our lives. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Okay, so what is stress? When I was writing this, I was like even getting stressed writing about stress. And just a quick show of hands, does anyone currently garden or farm or work in the soil? Yeah? Okay, yeah, cool. A lot of times when I think about these things and I look at current research on stress and things, I always go back and reflect, and I like to garden and process on that stuff. So it helps bring our inflammatory state down. So just looking at stress, it's a fact of life, right? These are natural responses that occur in the body, and for a reason, right? They help, but they actually, short bursts bursts of stress can keep us healthy and kind of on adaptable. And for most of our biological history, that's been the case, right? We react, we have a stress response. We look at animals in our local ecology. Maybe they have a stress response, they have some type of trauma, shake it out, and they continue on. And so that's kind of what our bodies have been adapted to. But now, here we are in the present moment, where we are being exposed to prolonged amounts of stress, whether that's due to paying bills or work or working with your boss, whatever it is. We all have these little stress indicators throughout our lives that we need to manage and figure out how we adapt to them. So looking at stress in a long-term sense, it can really wreak havoc on the body. And we know that reproductive disorders can result of that, endocrine dysregulation. We have insulin resistance, obesity, chronic fatigue, cardiovascular disease, and all these things could be dependent upon your hereditary predispositions, what's in your genes, and things like that. So that's also another important aspect to look at is, what do I carry in my family? What are our predispositions, and how does stress play on those triggers? So just looking at the stress response, when we look at allostasis or allostatic overload, they're just synonyms for basically our physiological mediators that help maintain homeostasis in the body. So blood sugar regulation, oxygen, temperature, all of those things, and then the various elements in our lives that contribute to an increase in what we consider a stress response. So some primary mediators of allostasis or stress include hormones of the HPA axis. We have plenty of hormones, especially as women, that can be really hard to regulate. And then we have catecholamines and cytokines. And then just to highlight here that adrenaline and cortisol are our two main mediators of this. Has anyone seen those commercials on TV about, cortisol levels? And there's a lot of the fat loss gimmicks and things like that. Those things are kind of frustrating, right? Because we're looking at a natural process of the body and almost demonizing it when we can actually get in there, understand it, and work with it. There's a really, when we educate ourselves on this process and what happens in this cycle, we can actually go in and kind of tweak where our triggers and stress points are, and then insert botanical medicine or whatever practices or Western medicine that help you get the body back to homeostasis or autoregulation. So one of my favorite herbalists and MD, she's an MD, Aviva Romm. Has anyone heard of her before? Yeah, okay, great. Have you gone to any conferences and seen her speak? Amazing, right? Yeah, she is, if you're ever interested in stress and understanding the stress response cycle or adrenal fatigue, she is the lady to go to. And she's a very engaging speaker and has presented, yeah.
The talk I heard is she told the history of how she started out about 14 and she was a midwife
Right.
for most of her life, and she felt like medical people weren't taking her seriously, so she became a medical doctor.
Right.
And she's just amazing.
Yeah, she has an incredible story.
Put the two together.
Right. And so Dr. Aviva Romm, she has many publications out on adrenal fatigue, the chronic stress response cycle, and she says that essentially it's this constellation of symptoms that we relate to the downstream effects. So we're looking at this chronic exposure to the stress hormones, and she addresses cortisol and adrenaline, and then how that affects the HPA axis. And she just also notes on the, has lots of information and research on the physiological effects and how we can address them and look for them and tailor them to our own issues or bodies. So I recommend you checking her out and her extensive research and work. When we look at adrenal fatigue and stress triggers, so as I was saying earlier, we all have specific stress response triggers, right? And that could be due to familial history, or it could just be learned behavior. So a lot of research is looking at even in vitro triggers and what we kind of take on from our parents. So we're born essentially with certain set points and cortisol responses, and that can affect the long-term implications of those stressors. So some of the examples are diabetes, Alzheimer's, obesity, cognitive decline, and more. Okay, so we have this general idea of stress and allostatic load and the long-term implications. And one thing that I always ask if I'm working with someone or, and I do this personally, is looking at what are the behaviors that contribute to the disrupt in our autonomic nervous system. So what are behaviors in your life that enable this cycle to occur? Because it's really, really hard to break the stress response cycle. So if we're able to address what those things are that contribute and enable that process, then we can better hone in on, okay, what are herbs that are beneficial for making those adjustments and tweaking that? And I just will use this as kind of if you're working or just does anyone journal or write things out? Processor, yeah. So it's just a nice way to sit down and write out, okay, maybe make some observations over a week's time, or if you know you're coming up to a large presentation or something at work, maybe take note of how your body or your mental state is reacting to that. Okay, this looks very wordy, but I'll break it down super quick for you. So when we look at working with botanical medicine, I don't typically advise, you can work with one system, but like plants in the ecology, so we have our farmers and gardeners, right, out there. So plants serve a specific function, ecological function, and they all rely on each other. If we look at monoculture crops in industrial or conventional agriculture, they're way more susceptible and vulnerable to pests and all sorts of things, hard capping of the soil, fertilizers, all that stuff can enable that the crops to be more vulnerable to diseases. So I just use that as an example, comparing that to more what we call like sustainable or organic agriculture system, which utilizes multiple plant species and plants them in a specific way, so that we can kind of mimic the ecology in the natural system. And that's what we want to do with our bodies. So a lens that I often take when I'm working with my students is looking at how the biomimicry principles, so looking at how nature presents itself and using those same patterns and mapping itself on the body. So when we're looking at creating this healing matrix protocol, it's looking at, okay, what are the systems in my body that are being, that need some boosting up and that need to return to homeostasis or increase autoregulation. So then essentially we'll look at, okay, what's our first step? Our first step is bringing our body back down from this frazzled high wire state, right? And bringing it back down into a nourished state so that we can start to make some space for healing. So first step is addressing and rewiring the stress responses in the nervous system. The second step is simultaneously nourishing digestive or endocrine systems, and this is to support the gut microbiome as well as any type of hormonal regulation. And then our third step is to remain consistent in the usage of adaptogenic and long-term herbal medicines to help maintain resiliency and build that stability in the body. So first step, nourish, bring it back down. Second step is feeding the different systems that need to be addressed and that need a little bit more extra support. Also, gut microbiome is super important in this step. And then third is looking at the long-term stability. Okay, has anyone heard of Donald Yantz before? Yeah, you've heard of Donald Yantz. Awesome. He is an herbal oncologist. He has also works in, I think, Portland, right? Portland, Oregon. He has his own institute. They're doing pretty beautiful work out there. But he works a lot with adaptogenic herbs. He also has a medical textbook on them. And he really focuses on using what we call adaptogens, which we'll define shortly, to address dysfunction in the HPA axis and the endocrine system. Okay, so what are adaptogens? Has anyone heard of adaptogens before? Yeah, okay. So in 1947, the Soviet Union, the Ministry of Health, they coined this term adaptogen. And essentially adaptogens, you can think of them as vital tonics. So you take them regularly and long term. And there are different classifications. There's 3 classifications of adaptogenic herbs, all of which are immunomodulating. They have neuroprotective qualities. They're antioxidant and free radical scavenging. And they improve cognitive function. They also can induce antidepressant activities, anti-anxiety, and they reduce the state of cell apoptosis. So essentially, these are a pretty big, powerful class of herbs that not only address the endocrine system, but they're working on multiple systems within the body to create long-term adaptation. So just a quick little reminder, adaptogens, they're helping the body adapt to stress and working on the HPA axis to do so. Okay, so what's their role? We have 3 phases, right, in stress. We have the alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. So adaptogens are working at all of those levels to help your body, adapt to stress and to almost readdress what your stress triggers are, right? So they kind of allow you, from just a colloquial standpoint, they allow you to take a step back from your normal inner dialogue that goes on and reassess and kind of become disattached to it. So as I said, they act to prolong the phase of resistance, and their general stimulatory effects. So they're not like coffee stimulating. They actually are much more grounding stimulating, but they're addressing the nervous system in that process. That's why they use the term stimulating. And their increased performance in stress, and then that also increases DNA, RNA, and protein synthesis. I also recommend, when we're looking at adaptogens, that we create formulations with multiple adaptogens. That also ensures more stability, more resiliency in the body. So just a quick example here, an adaptogen with a liver enhancer, serotonin secretion, and inflammation management. So we're looking at plant species that will help work on multiple functions and systems within the body and help the body readdress what stress is. And then this is meant to be incorporated for everyday use. It's not like a one-time or short-term thing. Okay, and then just to recap, so we have, as an example, a chronic acute stress response. Generally speaking, the cortisol goes down, and evening the cortisol will rise. So we want to address creating formulas or working with plants that will reestablish your circadian rhythm. Okay, so we're going to jump into adaptogens right now. And the first one we're going to start off with is ashwagandha. Has anyone heard of that? Yeah? Does anyone use? Yeah, it's a tremendous herb. If we have any farmers or gardeners in here, I highly recommend experimenting with ashwagandha because it takes to this climate very, very easily. So ashwagandha, what's the deal here? So it's native to India, Northern Africa, and parts of the Middle East, and we traditionally use the roots. So ashwagandha, you'll notice that it has berries. Let's see. You can kind of see them. It has berries, but we typically go for the roots when we're utilizing ashwagandha. It's a very restorative medicine. It's one of the most well-known or well-used herbs in Ayurveda, in the Ayurvedic traditions. Is anyone familiar with Ayurveda? Yeah. And so it's typically used as a deeply restorative medicine. So once again, if someone's in a very frazzled state, chronic adrenal fatigue, they're just kind of at their wits' end, ashwagandha is a really great herb to take just right off the bat because it's a deeply nourishing and tonifying herb. And it addresses irritability, anxiety, insomnia. So all of those symptoms that can arise when we're just feeling like we're at our wits' end, like, all right, I'm done here. Ashwagandha is really great for improving that and energy. And then it also addresses pain, skin diseases, infection, inflammation. It helps readjust the gastrointestinal, any type of a gastrointestinal issue, so IBS, things like that. And it's just a general tonic for improving libido, liver health, your mental state. There are a few nicknames for it. One is strong as a horse, and once you start taking ashwagandha, you'll see why, because you feel very invigorated, you feel very strong and grounded. And then just some in vivo studies show that it is thyroid stimulating and it's stress reducing, and it also can induce memory. And it's a Class 2B herb by the American Herbal Products Association. Okay, next up is Bacopa. Has anyone heard of Bacopa? Yeah? Okay, so this is one of my favorite ones. It's an adaptogen. Its nickname is Herb of Grace, or water hyssop. And essentially, and historically, it has been taken by yogis and other monks essentially to keep their memory going for long hymns. And so they would drink a cup of tea to induce memory for these long hymns. But Bacopa is really phenomenal at cognitive enhancing capabilities. And it's also providing, once again, similar to ashwagandha, that grounding state. So inducing memory, cognitive function, while keeping that grounded state. And it is a creeping perennial, and it has those small oblong leaves like we saw in purple flowers, and it's great for wetlands. So once again, here we are in Charleston. We all know we get tons of water, and we have lots of wetlands. So this would be a wonderful herb to place, maybe if you have some water features in your yard or garden, putting that as kind of on a crenellating between your pond or water feature with the land. Hyssop, it's in that family, so it would be really great to experiment with.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What part of the plant?
Yeah, so, well, essentially you can use the leaves. I'm not familiar with using the flowers, but I'm just familiar with using the leaves. Mm-hmm. Okay, and next up, can anyone guess what this is? Yeah, great. It's in the family, Panax ginseng. So Eleuthero, it has, essentially, there's a very interesting story with Eleuthero. The Soviet Union did a lot of experimentation and research since 1947 on Eleuthero, and they used it during the Olympic Games to increase stamina, strength, and essentially muscle recovery, to increase muscle recovery. So if you are training or if you do triathlons or whatever it is, you use your body a lot, this is a great herb, an adaptogen to incorporate. And as we said, it's in the same family of Siberian ginseng, although they differ in their chemical constituents. And it's used traditionally for general weakness, debility, lassitude, even anorexia, insomnia, and dream-disturbed sleep. And the main key here to remember with Eleuthero is that it is immunomodulating. So it's increasing that high energy performance and your ability to recover. And it also demonstrates just a clear ability to improve your adrenal function. And then Aviva Ram also commented on some recent experimentation with it, saying that animal experiments have confirmed that the actions of these chemical constituents of this plant, they reduce the natural killer cell activity. So they're inhibiting the cortisol levels, essentially. And some other biomarkers that they recorded were increase in T lymphocytes and just overall improvement on cellular defense. Okay. Any guesses? Huh? Yeah. Does anyone not like the taste of licorice? I know it can be like a preferred thing. Mm-hmm. So licorice, we use the root. This is what the root looks like. And just some quick information on licorice. When I'm thinking about planning just different formulas with herbs, whenever I think of licorice, I think of a sweetener. So licorice, it has tremendous anti-inflammatory and antiviral properties. It's also antibacterial. and anti-carcinogenic, and it improves your digestive system function. So it's eliminating all of that excess phlegm or coughing. This is also great, when we hit the fall season and chai tea starts to roll around, it kind of makes sense, right? We want those warming, circulatory stimulating herbs, and the licorice comes in and soothes any type of digestive issues that you may have coming into the different season. It's also really effective at supporting your adrenal stress and inflammatory response, and it's doing that by protecting the thymus and adrenal glands from stress. And then, like we said, it's enhancing the bioactivity of other herbs. So chai tea is just a great example of that. We have ginger root, we have peppercorns, we have, what else do we put in there? Cinnamon. Right, yeah, there you go. So we want to pair it with other herbs because, like we see, if we're following those biomimicry principles and looking at plants in our local ecosystems, they function so much better and they're way more resilient with each other and having different ecological functions. So same thing here with our herbal medicine. Okay, yeah. The candy is going to be a way different product than the root. Yeah. Yeah. Don't go buy bags of Twizzlers or whatever it is that licorice is in these days. We're talking specifically the licorice root of the plant. Okay. Can anyone guess what this is? Huh? No. Close. It grows in Arctic climates, as you can see here. And it's an interesting one. The name is Rhodiola. Has anyone heard of that? Yeah, okay. So Rhodiola is a pretty amazing adaptogen itself. If you think of it, it thrives in these crazy Arctic, very cold climates that are not really conducive. They're not like Charleston summer where everything's lush and beautiful. And Rhodiola thrives in these pretty intense climates. And if you think of if it can do that as a plant, what can it do for your body? So rhodiola is tremendous. It's a psychostimulant, so it increases your memory, your attention span, and productivity. If you look at a lot of kind of comments or research on rhodiola, Eleuthero, things like that from the Soviet Union, a lot of it highlights productivity, which makes sense because during that time there was a lot going on with the Olympics and also getting workers back into the workforce. So it's interesting looking at, okay, yes, this enhances productivity. And on that note, I suggest that when we are looking to increase our health, that we don't use botanical medicine like we would coffee, right? Does that make sense? So we use, most of the time in the Western culture, we use coffee as a way to just get over that hump. Like I need to take a shot of coffee or espresso, whatever it is, and then get to work. And botanical medicine is a little bit different. It says, no. We're going to actually nourish your body and we'll have those stimulation process for your nervous system, but we're going to make it in a much more grounded and sustainable way so that it's long-term rather than that short blip and then, you crash. So rhodiola, you can think of rhodiola in that way, is that it's creating much more longevity and resiliency in the body. You're helping to adapt to those stressors, right, that we talked about before, or any type of nervous system disorder, and also GI ailments and infections, and that you can maintain that long term rather than just a short term thing. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of issues going on right now in just botanical medicine of being able to access sustainable herbs and to have a good product or know that you're getting a good product. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. And as growers and, just people that as we want to educate ourselves, right, about that scene. And the difficulty is that it's not regulated like it would, the FDA doesn't regulate or approve of all of these things, which makes it really tricky. Now, there are companies, institutions, organizations that have phenomenal internal regulation, but that's not across the board. And the more and more you'll see that there are a lot of different governing boards, like American Herbalist Guild, or can you name some? There's some at the conferences that, there are these conferences like Botanical Medicine. I can send a follow-up email, but essentially they have a lot of internal regulation, but that's not common. And it's tricky as a consumer when we're trying to find a product that's beneficial for us that we know is sustainably harvested, things like that. Rhodiola I'm not familiar with in terms of the harvest practices. I was trying to think of what a good microclimate would look like for that here. We could probably make one an easy one right now with all the snow and colder weather we've been receiving, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah. Okay. And then next step, guesses? It looks like basil, but it's not. No. Close. So this guy, has anyone heard of this? Schisandra. Its nickname is, I'm probably going to butcher this name, Wu-wei-zi. You can think of it as a 5-flavored fruit. So this is pretty unique because it has sour, pungent, sweet. It has all of the different tastes. They consider a lot of botanical medicine, and it's just known as like the powerhouse adaptogen. The reason being is that it works on multiple systems of the body, and when you pair it with other herbs, it kind of increases the spectrum. So it broadens the spectrum of action on the body. It's very effective for any type of liver disorders. It's a hepatoprotective tonic. So if you're looking at liver damage or any type of liver disease, this is the herb to go to. It's really cleansing out your entire system. It's also used to treat fatigue, just as most adaptogens are. Your energy is going to increase, as well as acting as a male sexual tonic and treating asthma. So as I said, it has a broad spectrum of application when it's paired with other herbs, and just in general, it is a powerhouse of an adaptogen. And that's what it looks like. I'm not quite sure. I haven't experimented growing Schisandra. Has anyone tried growing it? No. It would be interesting to see if we could grow that here. Does anyone know what's going on here? Okay. All right, do we have any mushroom, this is going to sound weird, mushroom lovers in the house? Yeah. Okay, so one of my favorite mycologists, Trad Cotter, as well as Peter McCoy and Paul Stamets, they all have extensive research on the power of mushrooms. So micromediation techniques, it's something that we're doing over at the college using a strain of species called turkey tail. We inoculate basically toxic sites anywhere with heavy metals. Lead is a common thing here in Charleston. And essentially we use these strains to clean up those heavy metals. And they are a phenomenal remediation tool, and it's very cheap, which is another huge perk. But when we look at adaptogens or adaptogenic properties of mushrooms, reishi is one in particular that is really effective. I don't have a slide for this, but I just wanted to recommend it, researching it a little bit more. And like I said, whatever is happening in an ecological sense, it's also going to be retrofitted on the body. So there's a lot of really fun research out there diving into reishi and lion's mane. Has anyone heard of any other mushroom strains before? Shiitake, right? There are a lot of folks who are now growing them and are available at the farmers market, so go check them out. Okay, we covered just a short list of adaptogens. That's certainly not all of them, but I wanted to highlight some big boys there. And today, or after that, we're going to go through the nervines. So if we're looking at that healing matrix protocol that we addressed before, basically healing 3 different systems or creating formulas that heal multiple systems, nervines play a huge role in this because they help bring the body back to homeostasis. They increase autoregulation and they're deeply nourishing, which is what we want. So what's the purpose? As I said, they address the central nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And they're very important for adding into those formulas as a first phase and to continue on if you are someone who is definitely experiencing chronic fatigue or any type of adrenal fatigue. This is a key herb to have in your pocket. Has anyone heard of the lists of those herbs on the side? Yeah, so lavender is a common one, right? We hear that all the time. It's easy to grow. The bees love it. Chamomile, which is up here, over here. Chamomile is pretty much one of the deep founded, like if you think of folk herbalism, the first thing that could come up to your mind would be chamomile, right? It's been used for centuries, and it's a deeply nourishing and also gentle herb for your liver. It's not often thought of as addressing the liver, but it's a deeply stimulating herb to the liver and helps move through any type of gunk you may have. One thing that I liken a stagnant liver to is the DC Beltway at rush hour. Like if your liver's had enough, you know it. You're irritable, much more reactive. And so chamomile is just a great herb to have to kind of calm your system down. And it smells beautiful. And then we have Kava. Has anyone used Kava before? No? Okay. Kava is essentially a sedative herb. So there are some up here, some herbs, Kava, passion flower, valerian root. They have a different, yeah. 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 Right. That was my next point, is that those sedative herbs, Kava, passion flower, and valerian root, you want to make sure that, yes, you have a full night's rest of sleep and that you don't have like a busy morning the next day, because you wake up and typically a symptom is feeling super groggy. Unlike lavender, chamomile, lemon balm, and milky oats, those things are going to be more nourishing and go into your nervous system and coat your nervous system. That's what milky oats are. They're demulcents. They're essentially repairing your capillaries and things like that. Whereas kava and passion flower and valerian root, it's like, whoa, your system's way out of whack. We're bringing it way down. Also, passion flower and valerian are incredible for anxiety. Typically, you'll find them in tincture form. You can take them in pill form or by tea, aqueous infusion. But for folks who deal with anxiety on the regular and it's just something that can flare up, having a tincture, which is an alcohol concentration of the herb, and a tincture of passion flower or valerian helps to soothe the system. And then lemon balm, it's known as the herb, like elongated life. That's kind of like the nickname. And lemon balm is really tremendous at quelling the nervous system as well, but in a different way. It's slightly stimulating. So a great way to incorporate this in your system would be making a picture of it and having it after work, right? After work, typically most people feel fried and just a lot going on up in your brain. So having some lemon balm to kind of bring your system down, and not an aggressive way like passion flower, valerian root, where it knocks your socks off. And maybe some days you need that. But lemon balm's a great way to have a picture of it, take it easy, and it helps repair any type of damage in the nervous system. There we go. Okay, next up, nootropics. Has anyone heard of this term? No? Yes? No? Okay, so nootropics, they're a group of herbs that work for the brain, and they address any type of like cognitive dysfunction. So really their job when they go into the body, they want to increase cognitive function, mental clarity. They're kind of like dusting off any type of brain fog that you may have. And this can also be induced by adrenal fatigue, as we mentioned before. So some key nootropic herbs that I'd like to highlight are bacopa, which we addressed before, right? That was the, what type of herb was that? Right. What class of herbs? What do we call those? Right. So bacopa is an adaptogen, and it's also a nootropic. And then we have ginkgo. Has anyone used ginkgo before or heard of it? Yeah. Gotu kola, rhodiola, which is also an adaptogen, rosemary, surprisingly, lemon balm, and St. John's wort I just put in here. It's a neurological adaptogen. There's plenty of research on it, but it addresses nerve tissue damage, and it's used as an antidepressant. And then I also wanted to put in here some anti-inflammatory herbs. So this is really important when we're thinking about being in a highly inflamed state. So we have those nervines, right? We have things that quell our system, like lemon balm or chamomile, lavender, all of which are super easy to grow here. And then we might pair it with, if we're susceptible to having any type of gastrointestinal issues like IBS, we want to have something that brings the body down. So we have this, adaptogens, nervines, and then we have anti-inflammatory herbs to help keep those free radicals at bay, and many, C-reactive proteins, all those things that inflame the body. So some key contributors to that are turmeric, and that's locally grown here in Charleston. It's very easy to grow here. It loves the climate. It's typically a tropical plant, but we're in a subtropical climate. We have black pepper, so pairing turmeric and black pepper is really important. It increases our body's uptake and receptivity to turmeric. A devil's claw and green tea, holy basil, and resveratrol. Has anyone heard of holy basil before, also known as tulsi? Yeah.
That grows really well here in the BC.
Right. So this is like, if anyone has a garden, this is the best weed to have. Typically, when I have a garden around, I will take holy basil and I'll just broadcast the seed, or I'll shake the plant out, and it always grows back. It loves this Charleston climate. And this is also an adaptogen. It's a stimulating adaptogen. So if you're trying to reset your circadian rhythm, taking holy basil, it has this, when you smell it, has a very effervescent quality to it. It's very sweet and light. And so it's likened to what it does to the body. It's very stimulating and nourishing. So taking that in the morning time is a really great thing to help reset your circadian rhythm and get your body going in a way that doesn't leave you feeling depleted.
And there's the Ackerman, is that how you say that?
That's a botanical name.
Okay, there's a second species,
Mhm.
second name there, can't remember it, but there's a red one and a green one.
A red
And
one.
the one that smells like bubble gum, the green one, I find is better than
Yeah.
the red one as far as the strength of it.
Yeah, definitely the green. Do you have a recommendation on, like, where do you get your seeds for that?
We've got a lot of them growing in the garden up at Unity Church.
Okay.
In the fire garden.
Okay, great.
There's seeds there.
Cool.
And I just harvest the seeds. But Mountain Rose Herbs has lots too.
Yeah. So if you need any seeds, maybe talk to this lady over here. And then green tea, it's just a nice alternative for coffee if you need to kind of reestablish your circadian rhythm again, or if you're already in a stressed state, maybe not having coffee is the best thing. It's going to leave you a little bit high and dry. So green tea can provide a similar state and is also highly anti-inflammatory, provides antioxidants, provides those pairs for the free radicals to latch onto. Okay, so we talked about adaptogens, we went over nervines, nootropics, some digestives, And so I just wanted to highlight a few other things that contribute to the effectiveness of these botanical medicines. One of which being nutrition, right? We look at seasonal eating. We hear about this, but when we actually think about it or practice it, it feels a lot different. So the reason for that is we want to have these local foods not only to strengthen our gut microbiome, because we're introducing local bacteria, all of those things to help our body create more resiliency. It's almost like learning a language of the area, right? Once you become proficient at that language, you have more access. And so that's what we want to give the body more access to health, essentially. So not only do they help your gut microbiome, but eating locally or seasonally, you're following the seasons, right? So for example, when we are coming up to the precipice of the spring season, typically, and when you look at traditional Chinese medicine, it's the season of the liver and the gallbladder. What does that mean for us? It means that we need a detox, right? The winter, we're eating all these heavy foods. We're storing energy in our body, whereas when we're in the spring, we need to shed that so we can do all of our work and, historically tend to the land, do all that stuff. So when we eat seasonally, having foods or herbs that contribute to that process, so for example, including dandelion root or burdock root in the springtime to help work all of that gunk through your liver, cleanse your body out, that's really effective. And then not only does that contribute to just your overall well-being, but it also increases the effectiveness of these herbs as well. So just being aware of your nutrition, what you're putting in your body, and trying to stay as seasonal as possible is really important. And then don't underestimate the small things. Sleep, we need to draw 5 little rings around that and highlight it, right? That's something that we just often deprive ourselves in Western culture. So sleep is so vital for our health. There's tons of research out there linking lack of sleep to Alzheimer's and all sorts of chronic ailments and diseases. And so we want to make sure that we're getting ourselves a nice foundation. Sleep is a part of that. Drinking water. Do we remember to drink water or try to drink water? It's super important. And then proper meals, making sure you're feeding your digestive fire. Yes, that means eating breakfast. And then pre and probiotics. So once again, addressing our gut health. That could be through fermented foods. It could be through, you can even take probiotic pills now that are super easy. But typically, having something that will tend to and increase your gut microbiome is really important. Also, when we look at aspects of our body, like the vagus nerve, right? There's communication between our gut and our brain. And recent studies have shown that there's over 19 different types of depression just related to our gut, which says a lot, right? So we want to make sure that we have a nice biology going on in our gut as well. And then blood sugar stability. Yes, eat breakfast, please.
On the water, does it matter whether it's straight water or can it be tea? Does coffee count or does it
No, coffee does not count. Because it's a diuretic, right? Same with teas. So green tea, coffee, all these things are diuretics. They're basically inducing you to lose more water. So we want to have a nice proper source of water and water intake. Thank you. And then just some simple things that end on mindfulness techniques. As we said before, botanical medicines and just medicines in general, they give you time and space. And so what do we do with that time and space, right? If we have an issue or an ailment, how do we want to reorganize ourselves and adapt to that in an effective way where we build resiliency and we feel stronger and from it. So some simple techniques, meditation and breath work, just being really cognizant of, okay, when I'm in this environment or when I'm presented with this person, whatever it is, this stress trigger, what happens? What happens to my breath? What are some symptoms? What are your tendencies that stress expresses itself? It could be IBS, it could be all sorts of things. So really just practicing mindfulness in a way that's increasing your awareness and also your capacity to deal with those stressful triggers, because stress is what we assign a value to stress, right? We assign like a certain power to it. So a stressful situation to someone might not be a stressful situation to another person. So just a way to process it and move forward. Some other things, prayer, if you're religious, serves a similar purpose as meditation, breath work, cognitive behavioral therapy, and then exercising and decompressing the mind of anxieties. So, like when we walk a dog, we're getting all their energy out. We need to do that for our minds too, because they monkey around too much. So that can take many different forms. It could be painting, it could be singing, it could be listening to a record, cooking, but just making sure that we give us that time, as Dr. Aviva Romm and many other people say, to go home and just be able to feel more empowered in our personal and mental landscapes, and to address mental health, because that is certainly a huge part of physical health. Okay, and then just finally to end on these points, that these mindfulness techniques are enabling your ability to observe stress. So the goal here is, it might be a little bit hard to see on this format, but observing the stress response cycle and other cemented patterns within our central nervous system, and record them. Take notes if you're a writer. Listen to the symptoms that are coming up in your body, and then the quote that Dr. Aviva Romm says, she says, permission to pause, giving yourself that just pause moment, even if it's for a minute, just to be like, oh, I recognize that, this is my stress response, and write it down or do something with it that enables you to change from it. And then what is the goal? The goal of all this botanical medicine, of growing it, of all of this, is that we're rewiring our reactive responses so that essentially we feel more equipped and we evolve as a person. If you're interested in growing, I'll send out some research. Have you signed did everyone sign the board? Hopefully you did. I'll send out a follow-up email. And if you have any questions, please feel free to come over and talk to me. I brought some chamomile plants if anyone wants to go home with a plant today. Just come speak to me. But thank you so much for coming today. Appreciate it.